So what was the cause? The main cause was because of this man called Joseph Kony. He wanted power and respect from his people. And quote to quote, Joseph Kony wished to overthrow Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni and create his own state based on his interpretations of the biblical Ten Commandments. And to do this, he made a list of commandments, a type of a rule, things such as you must respect people, you must not harm people, things like that. And this was because he wanted to go against, and he was against the beliefs of the current president, Yoweri Museveni, and so he got very popular amongst the local people. And because he was not an official government member or a political party, the government didn't take him seriously. And because of this, the locals lost interest and stopped supporting him because he could not create a change like he promised to. And because of this, he went against the people that were supporting him in the beginning and basically created this army. And he kidnapped many children, many innocent children, and they tortured them. Joseph Kony forced to kill their family members to make them believe that they had no home to escape to, along with other terror tactics related to their psychology. In the past 2 decades, he captured close to 30,000 children, and so Museveni forced the Akoli, which is an ethnic group, into displacement camps in 1996. About 1,000 people died each week while they waited for emergency relief because of the food supplies and the hygiene and things like that. And more than 1.7 million in Uganda's Gulu and Kitgum districts have been displaced by the fighting and are living in these camps. Some of the terror tactics that Kony used are such things like cutting off civilians' ears and lips to frighten the Northerners into silent submission. And if you look back, there are many children with no ear or no lips because they wanted to scare others. Quote to quote, this is from CNN.com. They expressed the feeling that because they were given a rank, they were given a certain purpose and respect and authority. And then once they are outside the LRA, they find that they become just another poor person trying to survive. They use a psychological idea of how they belong to a certain group, even if they might torture you and even if they treat you wrong.
What happened? The main cause of this event is the Lord's Resistance Army, also known as LRA. They're an extremist rebel group formed in 1986. The main leader was Joseph Kony, who was the commander-in-chief. He took the traditional military chain of command with other spiritual practices. His commands come directly from the spiritual world and not to be questioned, such as telling others if they do not follow, God will come down and punish them. Also telling the LRA members that they will overthrow the governments and will receive a leadership position. He prophesied to overthrow the government and rule the country by 10 commandments, which he broke every one of them. The cruelty of the group lost them support from the local population. They were soon kicked out of Uganda in 2006 since he victimized the citizens who refused to join. As a result, they fled to Sudan. In Sudan, they found a new backer, who was Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan. They got backed up with arms and weapons. Soon, LRA was pushed out of Sudan and stopped supplying them weapons. LRA then fled to neighboring countries operating in small groups. Groups' number significantly went down, but their capacity for destruction is unproportionately large compared to its size.
So, what could have been done to prevent the creation of the LRA? For this, we need to go back to the situational variables, or the things that incited the creation of the LRA, as well as see what type of situational, as well as to see what types of things can prevent negative situational variables. For this, according to a paper that Stanley Milgram wrote, the creator and scientist behind the Milgram experiment, the very controversial Milgram experiment, this is what he wrote about how to prevent negative situational variables. The first would be to instate a paradigm for the slow ascent to goodness by arranging a hierarchy of small acts of goodness that ranges from small acts of goodness all the way up to unthinkable ones. There is also encouraging the admission of one's mistakes, accepting errors in judgment, being willing to say that you were wrong, encouraging mindfulness, to think before acting, and not to go mindlessly into situations that are probably bad and violent. So, how did the LRA start, and what situational variables were present? First of all, there was a lingering sense of spiritualism and patriotism, and these originated from the fall of the Holy Spirit movement led by Alice Alma, which is essentially what the Ugandan Joseph Kony and a handful of other Ugandans took advantage of. These people would be considered the leaders of the LRA. There was also a very severe lack of oversight from the government and third parties such as foreign and or adjacent governments. So how could this have been prevented? There should have been more oversight from the government in terms of controlling and or eradicating groups like the LRA. There's also a need for the breeding of less fear in the Ugandan people, as fear is very likely an instigator of violence, as well as the creation of help programs for members of the LRA. I know this is a very far.
So, what were the consequences of the Lord's Resistance Army? Present-day Uganda is shaped by the Lord's Resistance Army insurgency. Many of the hardships that people of Uganda experience exist because of the LRA rebels. The sheer brutality of the LRA terrorized civilians and discouraged resistance. The LRA terrorized communities in northern Uganda by destroying their homes, killing their family members, and stealing their money and personal items. The greatest atrocity was the forced recruitment of over 10,000 child soldiers since the 1990s. The group would often kill family members, neighbors, school teachers, and many more in order to kidnap the children. Many of the children were put on the front lines to protect the adult soldiers and leaders. Due to this, so many innocent children died. The LRA's motivation to use child soldiers was because it was easy for them to replace the soldiers by raiding schools or villages. Years of this atrocity has left a hole in many of the communities throughout Uganda that were affected by the LRA as they continue to rebuild, and thus the horror still placed in the back of their mind.